Hello there, everyone. Look at you all already on here waiting. Oh my goodness. Let me see if I can adjust my camera a little bit. Awesome. Okay, Sue from North Carolina, Lori in Yakima, Washington, close to me, Pamela, Pennsylvania, Olympic Peninsula, all kinds of you chiming in already. Well, welcome and good morning. I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan, on this beautiful sunny morning in the inland Northwest. Just a gorgeous day here. So I am at my long arm this morning and I'm in a process of coming live on YouTube every single day for the month of April, generally in the mornings, and just chatting about kind of behind the scenes, but usually what I have sort of on tap for the day, what's on the long arm. Yesterday's was a very impromptu. I had what I call a tension headache. Really stitch formation problem, and it turned out to be a threading issue. So I just took the opportunity to talk through that and the various steps that I took to resolve that, and there was a happy ending. So that was great. And today I'm going to talk about floating a quilt top. So different topics each time, and you all are welcome to type in topics that would interest you, that you'd like to hear about. I have some scheduled for next week, things like talking a bit more in depth about stitch formation and about tension. I'm going to show you my thread storage and some of my favorite kind of starter level base colors of threads that I think are important. I'm going to show you my batting storage. It's a DIY storage system that my husband built, and it's great. So some things like that, but I'm happy to take any ideas for topics that you have. Good morning from Timmins, Ontario. Susan Raynars, I only float my tops. Peggy in Temecula, California. Waving from Wisconsin, Joan. So many of you. That's so fun to see you all on here this morning. Mariel from France, awesome and welcome. Rachel from Australia. Oh, that's so fantastic. Good. Well, again, I'm Susan Smith. You're in my studio, Stitched by Susan, for a brief live appearance. I'm doing this every day for the month of April. The timing differs because it's fitting in with my life and what's going on during the day, and also B, whatever it is that I'm working on that day. So I'm kind of slotting this in between. So be sure and like and subscribe to the channel. And also if you click on the bell, then YouTube will give you notifications when I'm going live. So I am endeavoring to set up the topic and the time at least 10 or 15 minutes in advance, and sometimes more, so that you can have a little bit of heads up as well. So that's great. Today I want to talk about floating a quilt top. Maybe you're familiar with that term, maybe you're not. But in case you're not, here's what it is. I'm standing at my long arm and my quilt top is loaded and the front end is floating, hanging. It's not attached to a rail at this bottom edge at all. And you know, I always laugh. There are so many things. You can ask any two quilters and get 3 opinions. Floating a quilt top is one of those topics. You know, should I, shouldn't I, why would I not? Some always do, some never do. So let's just chat a little bit about my reasons. I can't talk about other people's very well, but I'll tell you what my reasons are for floating and some of the pros and cons that I've thought of and what makes me tend toward this. I think ultimately for me, it came down to efficiency of time. So for the past number of years, I have quilted for clients. So I've done hundreds of quilts, and the 10 minutes even that it might take to roll a quilt top on another roller mattered to me. To save that time mattered. So also the fact that I use the same loading system every time makes me faster at it as well, right? So my loading system involves loading the backing at both ends and rolling it on with some tension, loading the batting, and then the quilt top. And I always based up the left side, which you can't quite see, across the whole top rail of the quilt and down the right, thus securing 3 sides. And then you can see here I've got my magnetic bars on the front. And these are just hardware store variety bars. This is a magnet. My rails are steel, and so those magnets stabilize the 4th side of my quilt surface. So I've answered the need, which is I don't want my quilt to be able to shift as I'm quilting it. By basting 3 sides and securing the 4th side, I've answered that, and I'm satisfied with that. So now I can very quickly load the top to begin with, and then each time I go to advance the quilt to the next quilting area, I find it faster too. I have one less roller to deal with, the ratchet of, right? I just release my bottom one from my backing. I just release that bottom roller and roll onto my take-up bar, and I'm ready to proceed to the next one. So a couple little things here. One is, not everyone loves the magnets. Not everyone has magnetic bars. So another option is a couple of long arm brands. Handy Quilter I know is one. Sell clips. They're kind of C-shaped that clip right over this rail, and they come in different diameters. So that's an option, but in some way you need to secure this front edge. I mean, worst case scenario, you would run some pins, you know, on the inside of the rail. I think you've lost your time advantage at that point, but it is an option, right? Throwing options out to you. Lori S. is saying, Gamble sells the big clips too, but I like the magnets better. Okay, I have not owned Gambles, but you're right, they do sell those as well. Joan, so glad to be here. Always pick up a gem from you. Lori, the only time I ever quilted a big pleat in my backing was the time I didn't float my top. I have no idea why. Honestly, I don't know either, Lori. I don't know that it related to the floating or the non-floating, but interesting. Peggy, my batting always bunched up when I didn't float. That's a good point, Peggy. I'll come back to that one in half a second. Good morning, good morning. Kay, I float as well. Frida, hello from Martinez, California. Awesome. Gloria in Tennessee. I love seeing all of you on here. This is so great. Okay, let's talk about batting for a sec. And I'm going to take my magnets off so that you're able to see what I'm doing, okay? At least a couple of them. So here's my floating top. And you see my batting is right here, also floating. It's not attached, and it isn't usually. But when I do advance the quilt, I do two things, and I hope you can hear me. I don't have a mic on, so I will try and stay close to the camera. When I'm advancing the quilt, I usually do it this way. Here's way number one. I grasp this front edge, both batting and quilt top, and tug all the way along. On my machine at least, the tendency always is when I just roll and don't do anything, the batting tends to bunch up a bit in the middle and be a little bit stretched out on the sides. So after a couple advances, I end up with an excess of batting here that wants to fold into a pleat. So I always, when I advance, tug this all down into place, kind of feel, make sure there's no batting bunching up under there. And I usually smooth firmly with my hands as well, watching for my straight seams if I have them. This quilt is all set on point, so it doesn't have them. And way number two would be, you literally can flip your quilt top up because it's floating and visibly see your batting and see that it's perfectly smooth and there's nothing getting ruched up under there. So that is a beauty of a floating top. There are, you know, again, there's lots and lots of variables here. There are several quilting machines that have the ability to pick up this bottom rail and lift it up, which enables you to see your batting too. So there's a couple ways you can do that, but it is important that you do smooth out that batting each and every time. So that's my floating quilt top. Have I covered all the essential points? I hope so. I'm gonna scroll back through the comments too. Ask any questions if you have them. Throw in any great tips if you've got them. I'm always about collecting tips. Patty, do you think it's easier to float if you have a wonky quilt? Great question, Patty. It's what I'm comfortable with, so I prefer to be able to see this front area of the quilt and be able to gauge any steps I need to be taking. So if my quilt is full in the center and I'm seeing it kind of hanging here, I can be addressing that with every advance. And if the reverse is true and the borders are full, I can see that as well. So I know there are people who are used to rolling their tops on who say, I prefer to address that at the beginning and roll the whole thing onto the roller. It's probably what you get used to. I think it's wise to try both ways and see which appeals to you. But then I also think it's wise to sort of stick to one way and get really good at that way. I've chosen floating. It works for me. I kind of have a specialty of dealing with wonky quilts. I don't know that that was a specialty I ever wanted, but I've kind of gotten that reputation and I'm okay with that. I want to know how to take a quilt that does not look square isn't square when it comes to me, and figure out how to deal and how to make it better and how to make it as square as I can. So I like floating and being able to see it and deal with that as I go. Okay, Cassandra, I also float because of batting bunching. Yes, and especially if you don't have the ability to lift up your quilt top if it's rolled, it's really important to be able to see that batting and deal with it. Joan, my setup is different, so I can't use the magnets. Can I float the backing and top? I don't think I recommend that. I think your backing has got to be rolled so that you've got some foundation to lay your batting on and to attach your top to. You know, thinking it through, Joan, in theory, I feel like you probably could float all layers and secure them across the top, but you're dealing with a lot of imponderables at that point. 3 layers that aren't affixed to anything. I would question how good a result you could get with that, quite honestly. All right, Judy, Grace sells clips too. I alternate with magnets and clamps. Okay, and someone mentioned to me the other day, I'm sorry, I can't recall her name to give her credit, but it was a reply to one of these YouTube episodes, that she found a PVC type clip at the hardware store that she was able to cut to length to put on the front. So that might be an option too. Certainly hardware stores have some amazing quilting tools. So Terry, good afternoon. Thanks for showing that. I have many of those same fabrics. Love it. Too fun. I'm pushing buttons that I didn't mean to here. Let me get my screen cleared up again. Okay. I always float my tops when they are hand sewn. Interesting. And that kind of makes sense. My mom was a hand quilter. That was how I learned to quilt too. And she had the system where you had the giant room-sized frame, and you stretched the whole quilt back and then stretched the whole quilt top, because a hand sewn, or even she pieced by machine, but she didn't have rotary cutters and square things up. So it was always a bit irregular, and just that process of putting tension on the whole thing was how we made it quilt out. And I realized that I kind of carry that process into my long arm machine quilting too. When I have irregularities, I'm like, you know, if I can get the perimeter fixed and get it in place correctly and then put a little bit of tension on it, lots of things quilt out. So a very similar process, but it's interesting that you do it, that you float for hand sewn and get good results with that. Tiffany's Quilting Life, I float everything too. It's easier. It's for sure faster, in my opinion. Janice, in my newbiness, I had no idea floating was a thing. I just did it because I didn't know anything different. I had no training. There you go. And you know, you might want to try not floating one, but rolling it on and just see how it feels to you. But I do love floating. Beverly, Mesquite, Nevada, I recently got the same machine and am enjoying watching you. Fantastic. PVC, what a great idea from Mary Ellen. Yeah, give that a try. See what you can find. I mean, truly, hardware stores are your friend. That is certainly where all my magnets came from. That's where my magnetic pin bowls came from. All kinds of things that you can get very inexpensively at a hardware store. I wonder if I should add here too, because some of you do have the same machine that I do, or a similar one. I'm driving a Bernina Q24. Her name is Stella. And it's kind of a disclaimer. I do not load my quilts the way that Bernina recommends them. So you can see my take-up roller right along there. That's the same. It rolls up the completed quilt. But typically they recommend this be your backing bar. So my backing would be rolled onto this bar in multiple layers. I chose not to do that because I like floating my tops and I like using the magnets. So I don't want that buildup of multiple layers of fabric rolled on there. So for me, I'm a rebel, and so I don't have any leaders or anything on this bar. There's nothing there, it's just a plain old bar. And I put the bottom end of my backing on this lower bar under here, which was intended for the quilt top. So I'm trying not to run through those terms so fast so you can kind of make sense of it. So the bottom end of my backing is loaded way, way down here on this roller. So that's my adaptation of the loading system. You know, I don't know all the brands intimately, and I'm not going to recommend to you necessarily that you ignore their methods for loading, but I think I will say this. Try what they recommend and also keep your eye open to other methods. I find this works really good. It is fast. If you watch any of my live streaming of entire projects, I show that loading, and I can load a queen size quilt in about 7 or 8 minutes. Easy peasy. So that's why I chose it. Again, the speed and the efficiency, and it works for me. So it's worth giving something a try, right? To see if it feels right for you, fits right with your tools and with the type of quilting that you like to do. And that's kind of a little add-on too. Most of the quilting that I do is, family use couch quilts, I call them, right? So this one is a great example of it. I am freehand quilting an edge-to-edge design. So the same kind of whimsical roses, I'm quilting over the whole thing. You might choose to load your quilt differently. If you do hyper intense, heirloom, dense quilting, you might not want a floating top. You might find that it's more secure for you and for your purposes to have both ends attached. So know what you love to do, know what your requirements are, and choose your loading style accordingly. How does that sound? Covering all the bases here today. Tiffany's Quilting Life. I get way more puckers when I have rolled on. I have never learned to control it that way. That's kind of an interesting point, Tiffany. It feels like that to me too. If my top is rolled, I don't have as much flexibility for managing it or maneuvering it. And because I kind of specialize in wonky quilts, I like that flexibility. So interesting that you found the same thing. Casey Quilter, my dealer actually recommended floating the top and batting. Yeah, it works, it works. Judy, I've tried your way of loading the backing and I like your way better. Thank you. Fabrication Quilting, good morning. Well, good morning to you too. Okay, I think that covers it for floating the top. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. But before I go, and I will check back today and answer any comments or questions that come in over the course of the day in case you're watching this as a replay. But before I go, I wanted to invite you to a free workshop that I have coming up on the 15th of April. I call it 5 Myths That Tie Freehand Quilters in Knots and How to Break Free of Them. My mission, truly, is to show that anyone who wants to quilt freehand from the front of the machine without any digital aids or pantograph aids can do it. And so many quilters have all these reasons why they think they can't. I'm not an artist, I can't draw, etc., etc. So this workshop is all about the 5 myths that I hear the most often, and we're gonna bust those myths. So the workshop is full of photographs and examples and me talking at a very high rate because I'm trying to get a lot of information into a short period of time about how freehand quilting is for everyone who wants to do it. There is no reason for you not to. I am not a trained artist either. Never thought of myself as an artist in my whole life until I found the medium of needle and motorized needle and thread. So I welcome you to attend that workshop if you'd like. It is entirely free. It's about an hour long. In reality, it usually runs about an hour and 10 or 15. There's time to ask questions. But I have put the registration link in the notes for this little episode, so you are welcome to do that. April 15th is when it's happening, and replays will be available because I get asked that all the time too. So thanks you all for joining me this morning. I will be back again tomorrow with a topic as yet undetermined. Feel free to type in topics if they come to mind. I've had a few suggestions that I've jotted down. They'll be coming up in the next few days. And whatever you're doing today, enjoy it thoroughly, and I will see you tomorrow.